Hello and welcome to DDM Morning Show. I am George Raphael, joined by Ibrahim Umawase. Ibrahim, hello.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Raphael. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching us from.
Now, security is a fundamental value in every society, but when a democratic government is unable to provide this value to its citizens, Thomas Hobbes, a social contract philosopher, described such a state of nature as salutary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, to many Nigerians, this Hobbesian description mirrors realities in Nigeria. But what makes it the situation more problematic is the inability to locate a single overarching cause in a maze of factors influencing the rise of insecurity in the country. Now, to help us understand the diverse phases of insecurity in Nigeria, we have got Mr. Emeka Ugwuonye, Esquire, a renowned legal brain and founder of Due Process Advocates International, Mr. Ugwuonye.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, I am certain you have been in touch with the security conditions in Nigeria. Particularly, abductions by bandits have reached an epidemic proportion. In your own estimation, is Nigeria beyond redemption?
No, Nigeria is not beyond redemption, but it is very much close to that point where it could be said to be beyond redemption. The ability of a state to protect its citizens and provide basic safety and security is a fundamental function of a state in international law. You have to understand that just as individuals are expected to perform certain functions and responsibilities either in their homes, either in their workplaces, states, that is countries, are expected to perform certain functions under international law. One such function is ability to protect citizens, provide safety, and maintain law and order. When a state cannot perform these functions, that is when we begin to view a state as a failed state, because you will hear that concept commonly used by people, failed state, and someone may wonder, what does it mean when a state is said to have failed? It means that the state has failed to perform basic functions such as providing for security and safety of its nationals. So Nigeria is pretty much at that point where it could be considered a failed or failing state. And you must understand that the developments in the world, the crisis in the diplomacy all over the world, leading to the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, regardless of how it is couched, regardless of whether it is called persecution of Christians or whatever, it boils down to one thing: basic failure of the state to perform this function of protecting lives and the property of its citizens against what we are seeing today, either you call it kidnapping or banditry or insurgency. All these things amount to that sort of failure and will raise concerns internationally. Now it is framed as Nigeria being designated as a country of particular concern.
All right, thanks for that explanation. Say that Nigeria is close to being a failed state or beyond redemption, but it's still hard to believe. Nigeria has a panoply of legal instruments establishing various security agencies. Nigerian Police Force, the main national police agency, is responsible for law enforcement and public safety. Nigerian Armed Forces includes the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, is responsible for defense against external aggression and internal security support. We have the Department of State Services, we tasked with domestic intelligence, counter-terrorism, and protection of government officials. Also, we have others, including National Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, Nigeria's Security and Civil Defense Corps, and Nigerian Immigration Service. You know, we have a lot of them. So, from the legal perspective, Nigeria that should provide security to its citizens. Unfortunately, we have not seen effective and efficient results. So my question is, to what do we attribute this incongruence between public expectations of these legal instruments and the reality on ground?
Yes, Nigeria does have these institutions. When it comes to the paperwork or the various laws, Nigeria will rank among the best in the world in terms of having laws and institutions. But when it comes to implementation and effective utilization of these agencies, Nigeria drops to the near bottom. And the reason could be attributed to several factors. For me, I will sum it up to one thing, which is corruption. And this has taken a long time to build up, but it has gotten to its very worst form year in, year out. I have to recall a personal experience. As you know, there was a period during which I was representing Nigerian government as their counsel in the United States. And that was a role I played for nearly 10 years. I recalled that when the militancy started kidnapping people in the Niger Delta, very early in that process, when kidnapping became a crime genre in Nigeria, I spoke to one of the attorneys general who was in office then, and I said to him, this is a problem. We have to react to it. I said, you basically have to react to these things in a very clear and strong manner. Unfortunately, the Attorney General did not take me seriously because he felt it was something against expatriates. Because at that time, it was something directed against expatriates, and usually the expatriates would pay money. But I was able to detect very early that if this was not addressed by Nigeria in a comprehensive manner, it was going to morph into something more problematic. And I suggested it because then I had very constant communication with the Attorney General. I was their lawyer in the United States, and no week will pass, 2 weeks will pass without the Attorney General speaking with me. So I saw the danger and I recommended immediate response. Unfortunately, it was not taken seriously. And today we've passed that point that I feared we might get, where kidnapping could become the crime of choice. Because anybody that is intelligent in law enforcement, you will see how it is building up. In the past, somebody will come to your house, take a risk of robbing your house and carrying large money around and then getting caught in the process. But now, all they need to do is to kidnap you or kidnap your relative, and you will be the one begging them to take money. You can't drop the money for them somewhere. So there is corruption. And regardless of the fact that we have these agencies, I believe that people from within the agencies are involved in these crime patterns. For instance, look at kidnapping. Policemen participate in delivering the ransom. It's amazing. So it boils down to corruption. You may ultimately talk about incompetence on the part of law enforcement. The incompetence is there as a problem, lack of training, lack of equipment. All these things could be mentioned, but they are small problems compared to corruption, because with corruption there, the training is relevant. Somebody's going to compromise intelligence. Somebody's going to buy inferior equipment. Somebody's going to sell the equipment given to the state to protect the citizens. So ultimately, it boils down to corruption. And something else I could talk about in terms of causes of these things is what we call political will. The ultimate political leadership in the country lacks the political will to act in a very decisive manner. The impetus you are seeing now, the appearance of new interest and determination, is all coming because of the position of the Americans. Otherwise, there had been complete lack of political will, and leaders in government seem to be interested or actually complicitous in these activities. I mean, let's go back to the day of Jonathan. Jonathan said that the sympathizers of Boko Haram are in my government, which was an absurdity. If you know who they are, deal with them decisively. You can't tolerate them. So apart from that moment of candor from President Jonathan, you can tell that all these people inflicting this extraordinary violence and crime on Nigerians could not truly operate without the acquiescence, connivance, or protection by people in government. So it is corruption and a lack of political will, because if there was a political will, the president could be very decisive. If I were the president, I've said this so many times, I would call these guys, sit them down and say, hey, you're in this office, but you're going to be thrown out if I hear any more of these incidents. And you mean it, I have someone who's going to replace you. These people want to be in office, they will not want to be thrown out, and the president will mean it. All these things could change overnight. If you call in these people and tell them, hey, I'm going to do this, and it will happen. Something else I will also point out for you. You see, you mentioned all these agencies for for protection and law enforcement. There was one critical agency you didn't mention, which ought to be mentioned anywhere in the world, and that is the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Justice. Look anywhere in the world, you find out the Ministry of Justice is very, very closely involved in enforcement of law against terrorism or high crime. When you arrest these people, you don't mess with them. The Attorney General, Department of Justice in the US is ready with indictment. In the US, the FBI works very closely with the Department of Justice. They get the results done. But if you look at it in Nigeria, you wonder, what is the role of the Attorney General? Why are these people not getting indicted? Why are these people not being prosecuted aggressively, effectively? So the fact that the Office of the Attorney General takes such a back row position on these issues is a concern for me, because ultimately, whether it is police that arrested a person or DSS that arrested the person, their work ends with arrest and investigation. Somebody has to put them through the process, the criminal justice process, land them in court and land them in prison. If that is happening in rapid order, all this will not happen. But unfortunately, Nigeria had been sleeping on these things until perhaps now that the president is willing to declare a nationwide security emergency.
Absolutely, sir. I 100% believe in what you said. And well, I actually believe that apart from the political will, there's complexity from, should I say, society itself. Because when Boko Haram came earlier, the people of Borno State, for example, protected them because they are their own children. So how can we address that going further? Because I believe Nigerians are protecting criminals from within them, shielding them using words sometimes, protecting them from even the security agencies from reaching them. How can we address that?
Very good observation. It is quite unfortunate that criminality in Nigeria, or patterns of crime in Nigeria, had either been somehow interpreted from the prism of religion or ethnicity. Okay? Before I get to this, just to show you how right you are and how pervasive the problem is, look at basic corruption. We know that our politicians are corrupt, but we are willing to accommodate our own corrupt politician. So if a minister is thrown out for being corrupt, it is his community, his people that will feel he's marginalized because somehow he was expected to be corrupt. When you see that as well in violent crimes now, as you pointed out, Boko Haram was tolerated. And why was that? Not just because of ethnicity, but because of religion. It came in not just as an ordinary criminal, it came in with the idea of purification, religious purification, Boko Haram. And by the way, what does Boko Haram mean? I thought, like most Nigerians, that Boko Haram meant the simple thing, people who do not want books, people who want illiteracy, people who hate enlightenment and education. So I thought, but it wasn't So I had an opportunity to meet a Boko Haram operative who was held in Kuje prison at the same time as I was detained in Kuje prison. And we began to talk. He was the man, very popular in the prison. He was involved in money movement, making sure that inmates had cash. And he was running a bank in prison and running a phone system. He was selling phones in the prison. So we became friends, and I began to talk to him. And I asked him, what do you mean by Boko Haram? What book don't you want? I said, because you are certainly educated, you're smart, so that means you are reading things. So he explained to me that they're not against books. They need books to operate weapons. That what they were against was the Constitution, that the book they meant was the Constitution. They don't want to be governed by the Constitution of Nigeria. But that's actually when they say Boko Haram, that they practically say, we don't want this book, this Constitution. It's not that they don't read the manuals, the electronics. They read all those things. They want to be literate. So that affinity between their message and religious claims, because they spoke about purified Islam, and they talk of Muhammad all the time. So you could see that these are very religious people, okay? And they're interpreting the actions in the context of their religious beliefs. So now that made it easy for Muslim communities to tolerate them, to feel they could tolerate them to some extent. But you also have to understand that Boko Haram is a very violent terrorist group. So people don't really have much of a choice. It's not as if the people could just say to them, hey, we don't like you, go away. No, these people impose themselves, and they were willing to impose themselves. And when you have an organization that could impose themselves on the population, it is difficult to say that the population accepted them. That being said, let us pivot and get back to the Southeast. Today, we are seeing a similar pattern to that. We are seeing a similar pattern because when we began to talk about the problems, the violence in the Southeast that has been attributed to IPOB and ESN, extending to the so-called unknown gunmen, until recently, towards the end of the trial of Nnamdi Kanu, we began to hear people say very shockingly that, oh, the government is harsher on our own criminals than they are on their criminals. So they began to own criminals. Okay, they began to say, oh, what, have they arrested the bandits? Why are they prosecuting Nnamdi Kanu when they haven't prosecuted the bandits? You should go to the bandits and deal with them first. This is a very shocking thing, but it confirms the tendency of Nigerians to be able to somehow ethnicize criminals and determine which one is their own and which one is others' own. And that pattern exists, and of course it enables criminals, even though, ironically, those people trying to own these criminal groups are ultimately the victims of the criminal groups. Boko Haram is killing people in the north, more so in the north than anywhere else in the country. The Eastern Security Network and their affiliates are killing people in the east more than anywhere else in the world, in the country. Yet, it is the victim that wants to own these people. Instead of the victim being happy that the criminals in their community are being taken out and that their community will be safer if done, they are instead trying to protect their own criminals and continue their victimhood. This is very dangerous. And but when you look at it, it is also connected to the failure of the official state institutions. Because when you talk to these people and say, why are you scared about ESN? They say, who else is going to protect us? Who else is going to protect us against Fulani herdsmen, including imaginary Fulani herdsmen? Okay, imaginary, because I haven't seen how many Fulani herdsmen they killed or caught. So there is a perception that the state failed them. And when the state fails, you now descend into the arena of the jungle. And when you get into the jungle, you begin to engage in what we call comparative analysis of evil, because you now look at two evils and say, okay, which one is better than the other? Okay, which one do we have? You are comparing evil. And that is why they say, oh, deal with the bandits, leave our own alone. And that sort of pattern persists, and it is sad, because it is a reflection of the failure of the state.
All right, sir. Absolutely. Some critics will jump into the conclusion that maybe the political process is what gives us what we have today. Yesterday, we hosted another guest who is advocating for what he called nichocracy, whereby the system is different from the current democracy we are practicing. So I don't know, but democratic process we are practicing in Africa has contributed or has helped in exacerbating the problem we are currently facing in Africa. Do you also believe in my sentiments?
No, I would not necessarily blame it on the democratic process. There are two reasons I would say this. Criminality did not die during military rule. There is no indication that if we have less of a democracy, crime will be combated. No. Yes, we did have the image of the strong man, like Abacha. And banditry might not occur under Abacha. He will be drastic in dealing with them. But Abacha himself, his government was founded on criminality. They have their own different set of crimes. Political assassinations, the killing of Kudirat Abiola, for instance, the killing of Rwanu, for instance. So that's why I would not. And then under Babangida, the letter bomb of Delegiwa. So when I look at all those things, I wouldn't think
yes.
that.
Let me come on.
Yes.
For example, their own pattern of criminality, their own pattern of insecurity during the military regime is confined, should I say, to the ruling class. But the escalation to the governed, the masses, I believe, is overwhelmingly during the democratic regime. I am from Plateau State. We have been over the years coexisting together in harmony, the Christians, the Muslims, and a lot of tribes, because in Plateau State, we have more than 20 indigenous tribes in Plateau State. But fast forward to 2001, after the Fourth Republic, the issue has deteriorated. And people believe there are people who are mining the pain of others for their own political gain.
I think I understood you the first time. Actually, you're very right in your observation. I understood you, but I did not want to jump to the conclusion of suggesting that crime, that the position in fighting crime is better under the military than this. No, it is one type of crime that you fight, but you replace it with another type of crime, which is also extremely dangerous. Because you saw what happened in Abacha's regime. If those things, if those so-called political crimes that look minor compared to what we have now, if they were not addressed effectively, it could lead to civil war, just like this thing. So, yes, I understand. When you look at the role of government relative to crime fighting, there are two possibilities. You may have crimes that are inspired by political actors. And you see that in Togri, you see that in political assassination, you see that they are inspired by political actors as their pattern of playing politics. That is dangerous, is more prevalent in a democratic setting where you have more active political competition. Unlike in the military era, you don't have political competition, so nobody's campaigning against anybody. Nobody's going to assassinate an opponent under that. We understand. That's one way you can deal with the state and crime, politicians and crimes. Another way you can deal with it. And by the way, Nigeria under our system now, actually engages in that pattern of crime supporting criminal conduct. Politicians use people, and when we get to it today in the course of this discussion, if possible, I believe that it is some of the violence going on in Southeast is sponsored by politicians. I will get to that. So now you come to the second part of where government is measured in terms of how it deals with crime. That has to do with prevention of crime. The political class have the capacity, it's not enough to say we are not sponsoring criminals. That's fine. Okay, it's fine if you don't do that. But you have to go beyond that. You have to fight criminals. And this is one area where Nigeria has failed abysmally, completely abysmally. And that's what the Americans are pointing at. If you listen to the discussions among the American politicians, this is precisely what they're looking at. They're looking at the failure of the state to stop, arrest, prosecute, and discourage crime. Nigeria fails there. The inability of the Nigerian state to step in and cut back on these crimes is a dent on the country's image, it's a dent on the country's politics, and it's undermining the country, pushing it increasingly in the direction of the status of a failed state, as I mentioned earlier. So, whether democracy helps it or not, we can say yes, there's prevalence of it now, but we can also look at democratic process more comprehensively and say if it is played the way it's supposed to play, people will have more voice, people will have better opportunities that will create disincentive for crime, people will have the ability to identify and report criminals. That's the way it's supposed to be. I don't want to look at these events as a critique on democracy. I don't want to suggest, because it could be interpreted that way, I don't want some general, some soldiers to come out and say we're taking over government because of the state of crime. I will be shocked if they make that excuse, because that shouldn't be the excuse, okay? However, Nigerian government must understand that if it doesn't act in a decisive manner to combat criminality in Nigeria, something external will happen. And one external thing you're seeing now is the pressure coming from Washington, okay? Thank God it's not worse than that. It could actually be a basis to overthrow a government if care is not taken. So that's why I say Nigerians should view the pressure from Washington with open heart. Let them not just say, oh, America cannot intervene in our matter. It is important that somebody breathes down the truth of, breathes down the neck of an unaccountable political class. The Nigerian political class are unaccountable. You saw how the police, the few police officers we had in the country who were not even sufficient to provide basic security to the citizens had all been diverted and assigned to protect politicians personally, VIP police. So you see the pressure, it's important. Democratic system, if practiced imperfectly, if abused in the manner it has been abused in Nigeria, would tend to be unable to combat crime. It will tend to support crime. It will tend to actually use criminal gangs to achieve engage in political competition.